The wedding ceremony had been a blur of unfamiliar rituals and wary stares from both sides. But now Grenna Ravenshield stood alone in the bedchamber of the human homestead, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Her thick fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the wooden table, green skin looking almost sickly in the flickering lamplight. She had agreed to this marriage to save her younger siblings from starvation after their clan cast them out. But now that the moment had arrived, terror seized her throat like iron bands. Everything she had heard about human men and their wedding nights came flooding back, whispered warnings from orc women who spoke of brutality and conquest, of being treated as nothing more than spoils of war. The door opened with a soft creak, and Grenna's entire body went rigid. Lucas Emerson stepped inside, still wearing his simple wedding clothes, a clean linen shirt and dark trousers that marked him as a prosperous farmer, but nothing more. He was tall for a human, though still shorter than her by several inches, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that fell across his forehead. His face held none of the cruelty she expected, only a kind of gentle weariness that seemed to run bone deep. "You are frightened," he said quietly, and it was not a question. Grenna said nothing. Her small tusks caught the lamplight as she pressed her lips together, trying to control her breathing. She had fought border raiders, survived 3 harsh winters with nothing but determination, but this unknown territory left her defenseless. Lucas moved slowly toward the hearth, keeping distance between them, and reached for the kettle hanging over the low fire. "When my mother was still alive, she used to say that no good conversation ever happened without tea. I think she was right about that." He pulled 2 clay cups from a shelf, moving with practiced ease. "Do you like chamomile? I have mint as well, though the chamomile is better for settling nerves." The unexpected question broke through Grenna's paralysis. I do not know. We did not have tea in my clan." "Then we will try chamomile first." Lucas poured steaming water over dried flowers in both cups, the gentle herbal scent filling the room. He carried 1 cup toward her, stopping several feet away and setting it on the table within her reach. "It needs to steep for a few minutes. The longer you wait, the stronger it gets." Grenna stared at the cup as though it might bite her. "I do not understand what you are doing." "Making tea," Lucas said simply. He pulled a chair away from the table and sat down, cradling his own cup between his palms. "And hoping you might sit down as well. That cannot be comfortable, standing there all tensed up like you are about to fight a bear. Why are you not?" Grenna's voice cracked. She forced the words out, needing to know. "Why are you not demanding what a husband demands?" Lucas's expression shifted to something pained. He set his cup down carefully. "Is that what you were told? That I would demand something from you?" When she did not answer, he exhaled slowly. "Grenna, I asked you to marry me because I needed help with this farm and you needed safety for your family. That was the bargain. Nothing in that bargain included me treating you like property or forcing myself on you." "But humans always, some humans," Lucas interrupted gently but firmly. "Some humans are monsters, just like some orcs are monsters and some elves and some dwarves, but not all of us. I meant what I said when we made this arrangement. You work the farm with me, we share the harvest, and your siblings get to stay in the cottage by the east field. That is the agreement. Nothing more." Grenna's legs felt suddenly weak. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down heavily, the wood creaking under her weight. Her hands found the warm cup, and she wrapped her fingers around it, letting the heat ground her. "My mother told me that human men take orc wives as trophies, to prove their dominance." "Your mother was trying to protect you from danger," Lucas said, "and she was probably right about some men. But I am not trying to dominate anyone. I am too tired for that, honestly." A hint of dry humor entered his voice. "Do you know how exhausting it is to run a farm this size alone? I barely have energy to dominate the weeds in my vegetable garden." Despite herself, despite the fear still coiled in her belly, Grenna felt her lips twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. She lifted the cup and took a cautious sip. The tea was warm and soothing, with a subtle sweetness that seemed to ease the tightness in her chest. "Is it acceptable?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Grenna admitted. "It is. Nice." They sat in silence for a while, drinking their tea. Grenna studied him over the rim of her cup, trying to reconcile this quiet, patient man with everything she had been taught to fear. Lucas did not leer at her or make crude comments. He simply sat there, looking tired and perhaps a bit lonely. "Why did you agree to marry an orc?" The question burst out before Grenna could stop it. "You could have found a human woman. It would have been easier." Lucas considered this, turning his cup slowly between his hands. "Easier in some ways, harder in others. Most human women in the valley are already married or not interested in farm life. The few who might have been willing." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They wanted things I could not give them. One wanted me to expand the farm and hire workers so she could live like a merchant's wife. Another wanted to move to town and sell the land. This farm has been in my family for 3 generations. I cannot let it go." "So you settled for an orc," Grenna said flatly. "No." Lucas looked at her directly, his gray eyes steady. "I chose someone who I thought would understand the value of land and hard work, someone strong enough to handle the labor and honest enough to keep her word. When I saw you in the market that day, arguing with that merchant about fair weight, I saw someone who would not be cheated and would not cheat others. That is what I needed." Grenna remembered that day. She had been selling furs from small game she trapped, and the merchant had tried to shortchange her by a full quarter. She had not backed down, even when he called her a savage and threatened to summon the town guard. Lucas had been watching from his wagon, and afterward he had approached her with his strange proposal. "I thought it was a trap," she confessed, "some kind of cruel trick." "I know," Lucas said softly. "That is why I gave you a week to think about it and why I put the agreement in writing. I wanted you to know I was serious." He finished his tea and set the cup down. "Grenna, I am going to be very clear about something. This room has 2 beds. You can see them there. I moved a second one in earlier today. You will sleep in whichever one you choose, and I will sleep in the other. We are married in law, which protects you and your family, but that does not mean anything has to happen between us that you do not want." Grenna looked at the 2 beds, positioned on opposite sides of the room. The realization of what he was offering hit her like a physical force. "You would accept a marriage in name only, if that is what you want, yes." Lucas stood up, moving to the wash basin in the corner. "I will not lie and say I would not hope for more someday if affection grew between us, but that would be your choice, made freely. I will not force it, and I will not punish you for refusing." The last of Grenna's terror began to dissolve, replaced by a bewildered sort of relief and something else she could not quite name. She watched as Lucas washed his face and hands, the simple domestic act somehow making everything feel more real and less frightening. "I do not know how to be a wife," she said quietly. Lucas dried his hands on a linen cloth and turned to face her with a slight smile. "I do not know how to be a husband. I suppose we will figure it out together." That night, Grenna lay in her bed on the eastern side of the room while Lucas settled into his on the western side. The lamp burned low between them, casting soft shadows on the wooden walls. She listened to his breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep, and for the first time since agreeing to this marriage, she felt something that might have been hope. The next morning arrived with roosters crowing and pale dawn light filtering through the small window. Grenna woke to find Lucas already gone from his bed, and panic briefly spiked through her before she heard sounds from below: the clatter of pots, the crackle of a fire being stoked. She dressed quickly in the sturdy work clothes she had brought and made her way down the narrow stairs. Lucas stood at the hearth, stirring something in a large pot. The smell of porridge and honey filled the kitchen. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I was not sure when you would wake, but I made enough for both of us. And tea, of course." Grenna found herself oddly touched by the gesture. In her clan, everyone had fended for themselves at breakfast, grabbing whatever food was available and eating on the move. The idea of someone preparing a meal for her was foreign. "Thank you," she said, sitting at the sturdy wooden table. Lucas served her a generous bowl of porridge topped with honey and dried berries, along with a cup of mint tea this time. The food was simple but good, filling her stomach with warmth. "After we eat, I thought I would show you around the farm properly," Lucas said, sitting across from her with his own bowl. "You saw some of it before we married, but not everything. We have about 40 acres fields for wheat and barley, vegetable gardens, a small orchard, and pasture for the sheep and cows. There are chickens, too, though they are mostly my sister's project when she visits." "You have a sister?" Grenna asked, surprised. He had not mentioned family before. "Two sisters, both younger. They are married and live in the valley, but they come by every few weeks to check on me. They will likely appear in the next day or two, wanting to meet you." Lucas's expression turned slightly worried. "They are good people, but they might be curious." "Probably overly curious. I apologize in advance." Grenna felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of meeting more humans, but she pushed it down. "I have siblings as well. A brother and two sisters, the one staying in your cottage. They will also want to know if I am being treated well." "Then we should visit them soon so they can see for themselves," Lucas said. "Perhaps this afternoon, after I show you the farm." They finished breakfast, and Lucas led her outside into the crisp morning air. The farm was larger than Grenna had realized, stretching across rolling hills with neat fields separated by stone walls and wooden fences. Lucas walked her through each section, explaining the rotation of crops, the maintenance of equipment, the temperaments of the various animals. He spoke with quiet passion about the land, his love for it evident in every word. Grenna found herself drawn into his explanations, asking questions about things she did not understand. Her clan had been nomadic hunters, following game through the mountains, so the intricacies of farming were new to her. Lucas answered every question patiently, never making her feel foolish for not knowing. When they reached the pasture where a dozen sheep grazed, one of the ewes approached the fence, bleating hopefully. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of carrot, feeding it to the sheep with a gentleness that made Grenna's chest feel strange. "This is Clover," he said, scratching the sheep behind her ears. "She thinks she is a dog and follows me everywhere if I let her. I had to build this fence higher because she kept jumping out to trail after me to the house." Grenna watched the interaction, seeing the care in his movements. "You love them, the animals." "They depend on me," Lucas said simply. "How could I not care for them?" He looked at her, something searching in his gaze. "I suppose that is how I view all responsibility. If someone or something relies on you, you owe them your best effort." The words settled over Grenna like a warm cloak. She understood responsibility. It was why she had agreed to this marriage, to protect her siblings. But Lucas spoke of it differently, as though it was not a burden but a kind of honor. They spent the morning working side by side, Lucas showing Grenna how to properly fork hay for the cows and check the chickens for eggs. Her orc strength made many tasks easier, and she saw Lucas's genuine appreciation, when she lifted a fallen tree branch that had been blocking one of the irrigation channels, something that would have taken him hours to clear with tools. "That is impressive," he said, watching her toss the branch aside. "I have been trying to figure out how to move that for a week." Grenna felt a flush of pride. "We are strong. It is one thing orcs are valued for. Strength is useful," Lucas agreed. "But so is knowing when to use it. You did not just force that branch, you found the balance point and lifted it correctly. That takes knowledge as well as muscle." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She was not used to humans seeing her as anything other than a threatening brute. That afternoon, they walked to the small cottage on the eastern edge of the property where Grenna's siblings were staying. Her brother Grendel answered the door, his green face splitting into a relieved grin when he saw her. At 14, he was gangly and still growing into his tusks, but he stepped forward protectively nonetheless. "Grenna, we were worried when you did not come yesterday." "I am well," Grenna assured him, pulling him into a brief embrace. Her younger sisters, Greta and Gilda, appeared behind him, their eyes wide with curiosity as they looked at Lucas. "Is he treating you right?" Greta demanded. At 12, she was fierce and suspicious of everyone. "Because if he is not, we will leave. We will find another way." Lucas raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I understand your concern. Would you like to ask your sister questions? I can step outside if you would prefer privacy." Grendel studied Lucas for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, stay. I want to see how you act around her." They all went inside the cottage, which was small but well built, with a hearth and 3 straw mattresses. Lucas had stocked it with basic supplies: flour, salt, dried meat, and vegetables. Gilda, the youngest at 8, immediately attached herself to Grenna's side, while Greta grilled her sister with questions about the homestead and the sleeping arrangements. When Grenna admitted that Lucas had given her a separate bed and made no demands, her siblings' suspicion began to ease. Grendel even looked slightly abashed for his earlier protectiveness. "I have work for you if you are willing," Lucas offered. "Light work to start. Gilda can gather eggs and feed the chickens. Greta and Grendel, you can help with weeding the vegetable garden and learning general farm tasks. I will pay you in coin and food. When winter comes, you will have enough saved to stay warm and fed." "Why would you do this?" Grendel asked, his young voice full of confusion. "We are orcs. You do not owe us anything." "You are my wife's family," Lucas said firmly. "That means something to me. Besides, I can use the help, and you need the opportunity. It seems like a fair arrangement." Grenna felt something shift in her chest, a crack forming in the walls she had built around her heart. This human man was offering her siblings not just shelter but dignity, a chance to work and earn rather than simply accept charity. It was more than she had dared to hope for. They spent an hour at the cottage, Lucas patiently explaining what tasks needed doing and showing genuine interest in the siblings' skills. When they finally left to return to the main house, Grenna walked beside him in thoughtful silence. "Thank you," she said finally, "for treating them with respect." "Why would I not?" Lucas asked, seeming genuinely puzzled. "They did nothing to deserve disrespect." "They are orcs," Grenna said, the bitter truth of it heavy on her tongue. "Most humans see us as monsters, no matter what we do." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. The afternoon sun lit his features, highlighting the sincerity in his expression. "Then most humans are fools. I judge people by their actions, not their ancestry. Your siblings seem like good children trying to survive in difficult circumstances. You seem like a strong woman who would sacrifice anything for her family. Those are the things that matter to me." Grenna found she could not look away from his eyes. Something warm and frightening was building inside her, an emotion she had no name for. "You are not like anyone I have ever met." I could say the same about you, Lucas said softly. Then he cleared his throat and started walking again, as though embarrassed by the moment of vulnerability. We should get back. I want to show you how to work the well pump before dinner. It sticks sometimes, and you need to know the trick. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Grenna and Lucas worked the farm together, their labor creating a kind of unspoken partnership. Grenna's strength proved invaluable for the heavy tasks hauling water, moving equipment, repairing fences, while Lucas's knowledge guided the more delicate work of tending crops and caring for animals. Her siblings joined them most days, becoming part of the strange little household that was forming. Lucas continued to make tea each evening, and they would sit together at the table, talking about the day's work or simply existing in comfortable silence. Grenna found herself looking forward to these moments, to the sound of Lucas's voice and the gentle way he moved through the world. He never rushed her, never pressured her for more than she was willing to give, but she could see the quiet affection growing in his eyes when he looked at her. And though it terrified her to admit it even to herself, she felt something growing in return. It started as respect for his fairness and kindness, but it deepened into something warmer, something that made her heart skip when their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same tool, something that made her hyper-aware of his presence across the room each night. One evening, nearly a month after their wedding, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder shook the house, and rain hammered against the roof in waves. Grenna sat up in her bed, unable to sleep through the noise. Across the room she could hear Lucas stirring as well. "Are you awake?" he asked quietly. "Yes, the storm is loud." "It is a bad one," Lucas agreed. "I should check the barn. Sometimes the door does not latch properly in high winds and the animals get spooked." Before he could rise, Grenna was already pulling on her boots. "I will come with you." "You should not go alone." They descended the stairs together and stepped out into the pelting rain. It soaked through their clothes immediately, cold and relentless. They ran for the barn, fighting against wind that tried to push them backward. Lucas had been right. The barn door was banging open, and inside, the animals were in distress. The cows lowed anxiously, and the sheep huddled together in their pen. Together, Grenna and Lucas worked to calm the animals, speaking in soothing tones and checking that everyone was secure. Grenna used her strength to drag a heavy beam across the door, creating a makeshift brace that would hold against the wind. When everything was finally settled, they stood catching their breath, dripping water onto the hay-strewn floor. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn in stark white light, and in that moment, Grenna saw Lucas clearly soaked to the bone, hair plastered to his forehead but with a slight smile on his face. "What are you smiling about?" she asked. "We are miserable." "We are," Lucas agreed, "but we are handling it together. That feels good, does it not? Knowing you have someone beside you when things get difficult." Grenna's breath caught. Yes, she wanted to say. Yes, it does, but the words stuck in her throat, too vulnerable to release. Instead, she just nodded. They waited in the barn for the worst of the storm to pass, sitting on hay bales and listening to the rain drum against the roof. In the warm darkness, surrounded by the soft sounds of the animals, Grenna felt a kind of peace she had never known. This strange life she had stumbled into, this marriage of convenience that was slowly becoming something real. It was starting to feel like home. "Lucas," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I am listening." She struggled for the right words, her heart pounding. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was making a trade. Safety for my family in exchange for labor, nothing more. I thought you would be cruel or at best indifferent, and I was prepared for that. I was prepared to endure." Lucas waited, not interrupting, his attention fully on her. "But you have been kind," Grenna continued, her voice rough with emotion. You have treated me and my siblings with respect and patience. You have never demanded anything from me, never made me feel lesser for being an orc. You have just been good, and I do not know what to do with that." "You do not have to do anything with it," Lucas said gently. "Goodness is not a debt you owe." "But I want to," Grenna said, the confession bursting out of her. "I want to give something back. I want—" She faltered, not sure how to express the tangle of feelings inside her. Lucas shifted closer on the hay bale, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite their wet clothes. "Grenna, what do you want? Tell me plainly." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I want this marriage to be real, not just in name but truly. I want to be your wife in all ways if you will have me." For a moment, Lucas did not move, and fear lanced through her had she misread everything. But then he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one hand. His palm was warm against her green skin, his thumb gently brushing her cheekbone. "I would like nothing more," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but only if you are certain. I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am certain," Grenna said, and she was. The fear from her wedding night had transformed into something entirely different: anticipation, desire, trust. "I want to choose this. I want to choose you." Lucas leaned forward, and Grenna met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as months of carefully suppressed longing came flooding to the surface. Grenna's hands found his shoulders, gripping tight, and Lucas wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close despite the dampness of their clothes. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest, matching the frantic beat of her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably wait until we are back in the house," he said with a slightly shaky laugh, "and dry, and in an actual bed." Grenna found herself laughing too, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed? "That seems practical." "I am occasionally practical," Lucas said, though he did not move away from her. They sat there a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms, listening as the storm gradually subsided. When they finally returned to the house, they climbed the stairs together. This time, there was no fear, no dread. Grenna chose Lucas's bed instead of her own, and he welcomed her into it with gentle hands and whispered words that made her feel cherished rather than claimed. They took their time, learning each other's bodies with patience and care, building something between them that was based on mutual desire and respect. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Grenna felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. Lucas traced idle patterns on her shoulder, his touch soft and affectionate. "I have a confession," he murmured into the darkness. "What is it?" "I was terrified on our wedding night, too. I was so afraid of frightening you or doing something wrong that I barely slept. I just kept thinking about that tea and hoping it would be enough to show you I was safe." Grenna turned in his arms to look at him. "It was enough. It was more than enough. That tea changed everything." Lucas smiled, and she kissed him again, slow and sweet. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither felt alone. The seasons shifted as summer gave way to autumn. The farm flourished under their combined efforts, producing a harvest that exceeded Lucas's projections. Grenna's siblings thrived as well. Grendel grew stronger and more confident, learning animal husbandry from Lucas with eager attention. Greta's suspicious nature transformed into protectiveness over the farm itself, and she took to guarding the henhouse from foxes with fierce dedication. Little Gilda became the self-appointed keeper of the chickens, naming each one and scolding anyone who upset them. Lucas's sisters eventually visited, and though they were startled by Grenna at first, they warmed to her quickly when they saw how happy their brother had become. They taught Grenna things about cooking and preserving that she had never learned in her nomadic clan. And in return, she taught them some of the tracking and hunting skills that orcs passed down through generations. The exchange felt like building bridges, creating connections across the divide that had always separated their peoples. Not everyone in the nearby town was accepting. Some humans muttered darkly about Lucas's orc wife and the green-skinned children working his farm. A few merchants refused to trade with him, and some former friends stopped visiting. But Lucas faced the prejudice with quiet dignity, never hiding Grenna or apologizing for his choice. "They are afraid of what they do not understand," he told her after a particularly unpleasant encounter at the market. "That is their failing, not yours. Anyone who judges you without knowing you is not worth my concern." Grenna loved him fiercely for that loyalty, for the way he stood beside her without flinching. She had never expected to find such steadfast support from a human, had never dared to hope that someone would choose her over social acceptance. One crisp October morning, Grenna woke feeling strange. Her stomach churned, and she barely made it to the chamber pot before being sick. Lucas was immediately at her side, holding back her hair and rubbing her back with soothing circles. "Should I fetch the healer?" he asked worriedly. Grenna shook her head, a suspicion forming in her mind. "Not yet. Wait a few days." The nausea continued, and with it came other signs: tender breasts, unusual fatigue, a heightened sense of smell. By the end of the week, Grenna was certain. She waited until evening tea time to tell Lucas, nervous about his reaction. "I am with child," she said bluntly, watching his face carefully. "I am fairly sure." Lucas's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and then pure joy so bright it almost hurt to witness. "Truly, you are certain as I can be without a healer confirming it." "But yes, I know my body. We are going to have a baby." Lucas stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his tea, then swept Grenna into his arms, lifting her clear off the ground despite her size and weight. He spun her around, laughing with delight, and she found herself laughing too at his unrestrained happiness. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. This is—" He shook his head, unable to find adequate words. "Are you happy?" Grenna asked, needing to hear it directly. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lucas said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything, Grenna. A partner, a family, a future I never thought I would have. I love you. I have loved you for months, but I was afraid to say it in case it was too much too soon." Grenna's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you too. I think I started loving you the night you gave me that first cup of tea, though I did not recognize it then. You were so gentle, so patient. You showed me that not all humans were what I had been taught to fear." They held each other in the kitchen as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Grenna thought about that terrified orc girl who had stood in this very house months ago, shaking with dread on her wedding night. She could never have imagined then that she would end up here loved, safe, and carrying the child of a man who had taught her what true partnership meant. The baby was born in late spring, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's green skin. They named him Leander, after Lucas's grandfather. He had tiny tusks already beginning to form, delicate pointed ears, and a cry that could wake the entire farm. Lucas was besotted from the first moment, cradling his son with such tender care that Grenna fell in love with him all over again. Her siblings adored their nephew, taking turns helping with his care. Grendel proved surprisingly good at getting the baby to sleep, walking him around the property and humming old orc lullabies. Greta knitted him tiny caps and blankets, her fierce protectiveness extending to the newest member of their family. Gilda insisted on introducing Leander to every single chicken, explaining their names and personalities to the infant with utmost seriousness. Lucas's sisters brought gifts and advice, cooing over the baby and marveling at how much he looked like Lucas despite his orcish features. Even some of the more accepting townspeople came to visit, curiosity overcoming prejudice when they saw the obvious love and stability of the household. Not everyone approved. There were still those who muttered about mixed blood and unnatural unions. But Grenna found she cared less and less about their opinions. She had her family, her farm, her husband, and her son. She had a home that was truly hers, not by conquest or by desperate bargain, but by choice and love. 1 year after Leander's birth, on the anniversary of her wedding day, Grenna stood in the kitchen watching Lucas teach their son to clap his hands. The baby squealed with delight at the accomplishment, and Lucas praised him extravagantly, making silly faces that had Leander giggling uncontrollably. "You remember this day last year?" Lucas asked, glancing up at Grenna with a smile. 2 years ago," she corrected. "Our actual wedding day." "Right, 2 years." Lucas stood, settling Leander on his hip. "Do you remember how terrified you were?" "I remember thinking I had made a terrible mistake," Grenna admitted. "I remember wanting to run but having nowhere to go, and I remember you offering me tea instead of making demands." Lucas reached out with his free hand and took hers, intertwining their fingers. "Best decision I ever made, that tea. Well, second best. The first best was asking you to marry me in the first place." "I think I got the better end of this bargain," Grenna said, squeezing his hand. "We both did well," Lucas said firmly. "We found each other and we built something good together. That is rare and precious, no matter what anyone else thinks." Leander babbled something that might have been an attempt at words, reaching for his mother. Grenna took him from Lucas, settling the warm weight of her son against her chest. He grabbed at her tusks with his tiny hands, a gesture that had become his favorite way of showing affection. Outside, the farm stretched green and prosperous in the summer sun. The fields were planted and growing strong. The animals were healthy and well tended. Her siblings were laughing about something near the chicken coop, their voices carrying on the breeze. Everything she had ever wanted without knowing she wanted it had somehow come to pass. "Thank you," Grenna said softly, looking at Lucas over their son's head. "Thank you for seeing me as a person instead of a monster. Thank you for being patient when I was scared. Thank you for loving me even when it was inconvenient or difficult." Lucas stepped closer, wrapping his arms around both her and Leander, creating a circle of warmth and safety. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger with a ridiculous marriage proposal. Thank you for working beside me and building this life together. Thank you for our son, and for every morning I wake up next to you. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They stood there together, a family forged not by tradition or expectation, but by choice and commitment. The path had not been easy, and Grenna knew there would be more challenges ahead, more prejudice to face, more obstacles to overcome. But she also knew they would face it together, as partners and equals, with love as their foundation. That evening, after Leander was asleep in his cradle and the farm had settled into quiet, Lucas made tea as he always did. Chamomile this time, Grenna's favorite. They sat at their table, hands clasped between them, and talked about their plans for the coming harvest, about expanding the house to give Leander his own room someday, about the future they were creating together. And as Grenna sipped her tea and listened to Lucas's voice, she thought about that first cup he had offered her on their wedding night, the simple gesture that had changed everything. It had been an act of kindness when she expected cruelty, patience when she expected force, respect when she expected domination. That cup of tea had been the first step on a journey that led her from terror to trust, from loneliness to love, from surviving to truly living. She had been an orc bride trembling with dread, and he had been a human man offering warmth in the darkness. Now they were simply husband and wife, partners and parents, building a life that defied the prejudices and boundaries of their world. It was not always easy, but it was real and it was theirs, and that was more than enough. The lamp burned low as night deepened, casting soft shadows across their kitchen. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, Grenna and Lucas sat together in comfortable silence, drinking their tea and existing in the perfect ordinary peace of a shared life. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility, and they would meet it together one cup of tea at a time.